Vultures on the Tracks you can catch every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV.
Part 3 of 3 of an interview with John Hankey on the Kennedy assassinations.
My guest today is John Hankey. John Hankey is a researcher, historian. His forte really is, the Kennedy assassinations. He is the producer of Dark Legacy, Dark Legacy 2, and the assassination of JFK Jr. The third one is probably the most provocative because it's probably the least covered. Many people are familiar with the problems with the JFK assassination in 1963 and the murder of his brother in 1968, but not many people are familiar with the problems of the JFK assassination, JFK Jr. killing or murder in 1999. John, how are you doing tonight or today?
I'm very good. Good. Nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you.
I'm happy and excited.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show.
There's a number of reasons why they killed John Jr., and it's worth talking about. One of them is that John Jr. published Oliver Stone and George magazine in an article in which Oliver Stone, in a sentence, throws off that, of course, John Kennedy was killed by his members of his own government. Oh, wait a minute. If you're a Kennedy, you don't get to say stuff like that. You will not find an example of any other member of the Kennedy family saying stuff like that he did. He's not trustworthy, and he was not. There's all these people running around saying, "Oh, Hillary killed him because he's going to run for Senate." No, he made you can find any number of interviews, and in all of them, he's emphatic that he was very happy running George magazine. He published an article written by the mother of the guy who's in prison for killing Yitzhak Rabin, saying he was a tool of the Mossad, that he was an asset of the Mossad, that the Mossad was behind his murder, and and then she cites all of this very, very powerful evidence to that effect. Well, what the hell, right? How are you gonna write something like, publish something like that? What does that say about you? And his editor said that he begged him not to publish this article, and John said, no. Well, these guys are planning 9/11. They can't have a guy like John Kennedy Jr. publishing a magazine that is willing to expose such inflammatory truths. So I think that they had to take him out, and I would suggest that George W. had to make his bone. And they said, well, George's got to make his bone. Who are we going to kill? And, some senior statesman of the dark side, of the deep state with a poetic bent, said, well, if the father killed the father, let's have the son kill the son. That makes sense. Anyway.
Now, with Clement and Pinckney, you're suggesting that the incident down at Charleston was the political assassination covered up by an alleged mass shooting.
Well, the point that I wanted to make is that they had reasons to take out John Kennedy Jr. that didn't have anything to do with anything, just general principle reasons. Mm-hmm. This guy is going to end up being a thorn in our side, at least, if not a knife in our back or a knife to our throat. Let's take him out. Mm-hmm. George needs to make his bone. Let's have Georgie take him out. I'd say the same thing for Clementa Pinckney. And let me get to the punchline because it's short. Mm-hmm. So I started looking for where Jeb was. Jeb was 2 blocks away.
Just happened to be 2 blocks away.
Yeah, he was 2 blocks away from the shooting.
Yeah, that's yet another coincidence.
That's right. I keep falling for that stuff. It's just a coincidence.
Now, with JFK Jr. in George magazine. Now, I heard too reports of his political aspirations. I didn't find any confirmation for it, and I'm skeptical of that. But your point is that wasn't necessary. His journalism was sufficient. This magazine that was publishing these articles.
He was gonna run for political office, but he only got asked about 100 times, and he started getting a little bit testy about it. And seriously and said, look, I watched what politics did to the lives, the families of particularly Joe, Robert's oldest son. And he said, if you're going to run for political office, it's like going to war, and you better be ready to go to war. John Kennedy Jr. spent the night at a hotel because he and his wife were quarreling the day before he died. His family life was not so utterly stable that he would have been prepared to go to war.
Mm-hmm. Now, one interesting point that I came across is this. I think you've spoken about it. Is this the gemstone file?
Oh man, yeah.
So, want to address that?
I fell for it like a ton of bricks, but it's bullshit.
When I read about it, it just seemed all too wrapped in a bow. The whole conspiracy in a few documents. I was like very skeptical. I was like, it doesn't. These things aren't. It's never that easy,
Well, it scared the piss out of me. The guy who told me was this guy, True Ott.
Mm-hmm.
And Ott said that he had been interviewed by George Magazine and that John Kennedy Jr. had flown out there and told him about the gemstone file.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked, and George Magazine had published the article about this pig farm in Utah, just as Ott had described. And I called the reporter, and the reporter told me that he had interviewed Ott, just as Ott described. And, the reporter said John Kennedy didn't fly out there, and that's sort of neither here nor there. And somebody's lying, and who's to say who? But I made a fierce enemy of somebody who said, look, this is bullshit, and it's bullshit because if he's got the gemstone file, let him bring it out, and if he don't want to bring it out, stay away from this stupid-ass story.
Mm-hmm.
And, this stuff was all red hot on my plate, this steaming heap with the, steam coming off of it was on my plate. I hadn't had time to digest that particular thing, and the thing that was freaking me out was that if it were true, and I was the only person on the planet who knew it, I was in very, very grave danger. And so I was anxious to get this story out so that I wouldn't be the only person on the planet who knew it.
That's how you protect
this
yourself.
This individual did not want to assist me in getting this story out. And, this is 12 years ago. I still feel lots of regret about it. Yeah, that story's a bunch of crap. Anyway,
So basically, what you're saying it was a plan just to discredit, people investigating these things, lead them down a false trail, and to lower the boom on them, saying, this story's wrong. It's all BS, and this is.
Well, one of the tactics of the killers is to fill the atmosphere with so much bullshit
mm-hmm.
that you can't. They're providing the haystack for the needle of truth to be hidden in. And, it takes all kinds, right? So, you've got super duper right-wing conspiratorial bullshit, and you have less super duper non-conspiratorial right-wing bullshit. And you maybe even have fucking Chomsky, you'll pardon my French. What the Chomsky? Saying Oswald acted alone. Oh, my God.
Then he says it doesn't matter.
Whatever.
Like, what?
The point is, you got all colors and flavors of bullshit here to try to pick that little needle of truth out of. But so let's go down that road. I was saying that at the start, that I felt that we haven't scratched the surface. We haven't begun to scratch the surface. There's all these screaming red lights that nobody has ever paid any attention to. For example, this attorney who saw Oswald and overheard Oswald and Ruby having a conversation that I think when you read the story, they obviously wanted to have overheard. And what I make of that is that they told Oswald, do you know the story of Muhammad Atta and I'm not going to remember it.
Oh, which one? I mean, there's a lot of things. His pink-haired stripper girlfriend, or his connections.
There were Republican politicians talking about him having been involved in a government program that the name of which is not coming to me. And Webster Tarpley just nailed this. That Atta and these other guys, I don't know, there's so many of them that they just pulled the names out of thin air, and it turns out they're alive in some other part of the world.
Yeah.
They never had anything to do with anything. But that Atta, it may come to me, it's called the B team. And in football, it's the red shirts, that you're going to have a game next week against a particular team, and they run a particular kind of offense. So you get members of your own school, guys who are not who are not starters, and they put on red shirts, and they run that offense against you so that you can practice defending against that offense, right? And then the red shirts they form up to imitate the defense of the opposing team, and then you have your offense run against the red shirt defense. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that Atta was told, you're the B team, you're the red shirts, and you're going to go through the motions of being a terrorist, and we're going to see whether the FBI can pick you up, we're going to see whether the CIA can pick you up, we're going to see whether any of the national intelligence agencies that are assigned to protect us against terrorism can pick up these signals that you're sending. And they told that to Oswald, and they may have told it to Ruby for all I know. And they said, you guys are going to go through the motions of preparing for an assassination in Dallas, and we're going to see whether the Secret Service can pick it up. We're going to see whether the FBI can pick it up. And when Oswald told Hoover that that's what the CIA was telling him, Hoover said, yeah, go ahead. We'll keep tabs.
Which is why Oswald runs to the movie theater like he's going to meet somebody, and why he declares himself a patsy.
Well, sure. But this is the one I want to go to, which is that I think lots of people are familiar with the fact that in the opening session of the Warren Commission, the Attorney General of the state of Texas, Warren Wagner Carr, calls them up and tells them that Oswald was an FBI agent, that his employee number was S179, and that he was being paid $200. And this to me, this is, how is it that there hasn't been a book devoted to trying to analyze what the hell that means? And nobody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the stupidest possible analysis is the only one that I've ever heard, which is, that shows that Hoover was in on it. Yes, because anytime I'm committing a crime, I set up somebody who has a million ties to me as the patsy, so that when they grab this guy who's the patsy, they then have a million ties that lead directly back to me. And, for example, you have the Attorney General of the state of Texas calling up the main investigative body, telling them, hey, Hoover. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's that analysis.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's when you're talking about with the, when you mentioned the so-called, the alleged hijackers, Muhammad Atta, and how, they're set up, they're told to act a certain way, you're part of this drill or operation, and all of a sudden they're caught up in it, and it takes a different turn that they're unaware of, and that's how you set these people up, That explains why the investigation was called off, with Anthony Schaefer, and it explains why two of them were staying with an FBI informant out in San Diego, and they were going to defense language school down there, all these connections, $100,000.
Right, it explains why the FBI would begin an investigation and then stop it and close the file.
Yeah, and the $100,000 payoff with the ISI.
Right.
Who was meeting with Senator Porter Goss and the senator from Florida, Graham. So I mean, and like I said, it is a rabbit hole. It's like, gee, I mean, the one clear thing is that the official story is absurd.
Yes, but that's all you get.
Yeah.
But so wait, hang on a second. Let's get. and that's the reason, right? The Kennedy assassination is old news. Who gives a crap? And he wasn't that great of a president, anyhow. I mean, the Bay of Pigs, in Vietnam, his Vietnam policy was just outrageous. The Strategic Hamlet Initiative was just outrageous. He wrote NSAM 263, or he and Fletcher Prouty wrote it. Prouty wrote it, and wrote it for Kennedy, and then he kept it a secret. What the heck? What's the friggin' point? I mean, it's just an insanely bad strategic decision, and I could go on, and I won't, but because we're running out of time, and there's some stuff. So there's one thing I'd like to point out, which is that if you call up the LAPD and say, John Hankey is working for the Los Angeles Unified School District now, and his employee number is whatever my employee number was, and his salary is, he receives checks in this amount, how did you get that information? And, if you want to know what time my daughter's school closes today, if you don't call up the local school, you're not going to be able to get that information. That is to say, that the local school is not going to give you need to tell them you're FBI. They're not going to give you my employee number and my salary. They'll tell you to call the district. And when you call the district, you're going to spend 6 months trying to find somebody who knows. And when you find them, they won't tell you. But if you call the district to try to find out what time my daughter's school closes, you're not going to be able to find out. You can't penetrate that bureaucracy. So how did Wagner Carr know this? And then, it only took me 50 years to have the light go on and say, Oswald had his pay stub in his pocket, right? He didn't have an FBI ID because he was a deep undercover agent, but he knew he was into some deep crap, and he knew that he wanted to have something to try to be able to bail his ass out. And I think it couldn't be more obvious that he had his pay stub in his pocket. And the main impetus, I think, for reaching that conclusion is not only the contents of the information that Wagner Carr provided, but you're the Attorney General of the state of Texas. Clearly, you have a career-oriented approach to life, and you're going to just destroy your career by calling the Warren Commission to tell them some half-baked, stupid-ass rumor that you heard. There's no way that he would have made that phone call if he didn't have the most solid evidence imaginable in his possession, right? He wouldn't, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't, if I were the least bit career-oriented, I would not make that phone call if I didn't have the friggin' pay stub in my hand. If my right-hand lieutenant swore in blood and on his children's eyes that he had seen it, I'd say, you make the phone call. You saw it. You make the phone call. I ain't sticking my neck out on this crap. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I don't think. Well, and let me jump back another step. We mentioned at one point that Prescott. Well, we didn't really go there. Prescott was working for the Nazis. He was working for the American Nazis.
Well, that's where I want to go with this. Is you hear this accusation from people who accept sort of the retail level of politics. The Bushes involved in the assassination of the Kennedys and these things. They're like, what are you talking about? But you have to get, what does the Bush family represent as a political dynasty to the establishment, or the Bush crime family in their past? And I think if you give a brief explanation of where they came from and what they represent, it's a bit more palatable because you understand the machinations of the deep state and the establishment in this country, how the elite govern.
Well, and so let me talk about that for a second. And terrific question. I'm so glad you asked. So, in 1942, the FBI seized Prescott Bush's bank, Union Bank of New York, and they seized it as a Nazi asset. And how Bush avoided prosecution, well, I guess it's not that hard to answer that question, but he should have been prosecuted, and he wasn't because he had such powerful friends. The Harrimans are not quite as wealthy as the Rockefellers, but I don't think the Rockefellers hold that against them. And the deep state is the Rockefellers and the Harrimans, and presumably somebody representing the Morgan Group, and the Cabot Lodges are in there. They were in there in the 1960s when Kennedy was taken down. But Prescott was CEO of Union Bank of New York. He owned 1 share. Harriman owned 4,000 shares. So the Bushes are thugs, right? They are the highest level thugs, but they're thugs, and they don't. Their wealth is, to say that wealth is not their strong point is to say absolutely the least. Anyway, I was talking about Hoover, and really that's a point that I want to hammer in, and I'd like to finish on that. This point that Hoover was set up for the assassination. The fact that they used Oswald as the patsy was the deep state getting even with Hoover, one, for busting Prescott Bush and seizing, well, much more, for seizing the bank, which was, worth billions of dollars. Getting even with him for that, getting even with him for shutting down Lake Pontchartrain, for getting even with him for not being a team player with them, right, for not being on their side, but in fact carrying out the orders of the president, whatever those happen to be. And the notion that Hoover would have set up his own employee as a patsy is ridiculous, because if not being an idiot, I mean, Hoover was just, God, he was such a master detective, right? I mean, they told him to find Pontchartrain, the CIA's most guarded secret, and he found it. They wanted him to infiltrate the Panthers. The head of security for the Black Panther Party in Chicago, the night that they murdered Fred Hampton, they shot Fred Hampton from the street, through the front door, through the wall, into his bed where he was lying next to his pregnant wife, and they killed him, and they didn't hit her. The head of security was an FBI agent. The Panther head of security was an FBI agent, right? They wanted him to get Dillinger. He friggin' got Dillinger. I think, and he nailed Prescott Bush. I think that he was an enormously competent guy, and he would never have set up his own patsy for what ought to be the obvious reasons that he would know that was going to come back to him. There's this phone call from Wagoner Carr. Well, I think that the killers probably told Carr to make the phone call, but Oswald's mom said that she thought he was FBI. There are customs agents that the House investigation interviewed that indicate that actually is a bartender who said, yeah, Oswald was in here meeting with customs agents. But the customs agents were coordinating with the FBI to carry out Kennedy's orders of shutting down these training camps. When he was working in New Orleans there, his closest associate saw him exchanging packages with somebody that he took to be FBI agents. The guys who parked the car for the FBI agents that Oswald was exchanging packages with took the guys to be FBI agents, so that the point that I'm trying to make is that you'd have to be a retard. You couldn't possibly, an experienced lawman like Hoover could not possibly think that he would get away with setting up somebody that he was working that closely with as the patsy without having the trail lead back to him. And then give me a break. Why would you set up one of your guys, right? Why not set up Jack Ruby, who wasn't one of his guys? Why not set up any one of the Cubans who were not his guys? Why set up that? You see what I'm saying? So
yeah, the cabal.
That's a huge point.
Yeah, the cabal identified Oswald as an operative, and they set him up to corner the FBI. Is what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's this. I don't know whether people know about it. So another red light on Hoover that nobody pays any attention to is that Hoover, in the movie JFK, there's an FBI employee named William Walters who Jim Garrison gave a lot of space and light to, who took down a telex and, boxed where he was supposed to box it, that said that there was going to be an assassination attempt on Kennedy when he came to Dallas. And okay, now what do you do with that? And again, I've never seen two sentences as an attempt to explain why Hoover wrote that memo. And certainly I've never seen two sentences to suggest that the fact that Hoover wrote that memo, I think, very powerfully suggests that Hoover was not involved in the assassination. And right, well, if he wrote the memo to cover his ass, then why did the memo get destroyed? But the really, I think, deeper question that I hadn't contemplated until recently is, why did Kennedy go to Dallas? Why didn't he listen to Hoover when Hoover said, if you go to Dallas, they're going to try to shoot you? Why did Kennedy ignore that? Don't you think that's a good question?
It's a very good question, yes.
How come nobody's ever asked it? Well, we're not very smart. The difference between us and the apes is mainly that we can converse, and since we learned to write, we're able to share the knowledge from one generation to the other, and that gives us an enormous advantage. But in solving a maze, a rat is superior to a college student. At least that's what the studies have shown, and I don't think that we're very smart. But it's only taken me 50 years to come up with an explanation. And what I think, let me say that I think that JFK and the Unspeakable is 1,000 times the best book that's been written on the Kennedy assassination, except that Bush's involvement remains unspeakable. And, there's two FBI memos, one of them written by Hoover, that tie Bush to the assassination. And this book has probably upwards of 3,000 footnotes. And they're all, really, really solid footnotes. They don't cite the National Enquirer. They cite government documents for the most part. It's just a fabulous book. And they leave out Bush. How is that possible? Well, never mind. The point is, they talk about a conspiracy to shoot Kennedy in Chicago that was exposed, and they talk about a conspiracy to shoot Kennedy in Miami that was exposed. And Kennedy's motorcade in Chicago was canceled because of this alleged assassination plot. But when you read the details of either one of those and compare them to the incredible complexity and, the huge number of people involved in the assassination in Dallas, I think the one is paper thin and the other is a couple of miles thick. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Now, wasn't the tip-off in Chicago from Oswald?
Oh, people allege that, and I don't think so.
Okay.
I can't say no, but
yeah,
the evidence for that is not paper thin. It's thinner than that.
Okay.
And C, from my point of view and analysis, it might have come from Oswald. I suppose that, I think that the killers, you have to pose the question, and then you have to step back and say, damn, that's not a half-assed question. If the head of the FBI comes to you, the head of the FBI who just shut down Lake Pontchartrain and has demonstrated his competence comes to you and says they're going to try to kill you, you've got to come up with a non-half-assed explanation for why Kennedy went to Dallas anyway. And my non-half-assed explanation is that Able Danger, I told you I'd come up with it. Able Danger is Muhammad Atta. So write that down and Google it, and you'll find out that there were Republican congressmen who were screaming that, they had hardcore evidence that Muhammad Atta was part of a government program called Able Danger, and they wanted to get some information on this. And God damn it, why wasn't the government, forthcoming in providing this stuff? Republican congressmen, really, really powerful stuff. And, everybody's wandering around saying, oh, and Webster Tarpley said, Able Danger is the red shirts. They're the B team. They're the guys who were told, you're going to be pretending to do this stuff. You're going to be going through the motions so that when we set you up for it, we will have all of this evidence that indicates that you were involved because you did all these things that we instructed you to. Although the hookers and the coke, not so much. Anyway,
but that was Anthony Schaefer. Well, where they destroyed a terabyte of data, right? I
don't know.
Yeah, I think, it was led to that trail, so they destroyed all that information because they were on the trail, which is
okay.
I think what happens, you get different government agencies bump into each other. They're investigating these things, and they get warded off because it's some sort of operation. I mean, it's like you get some mid-level guys actually doing their job, and then they have to get quashed. Like the FBI field office,
Right, but they're chasing a red herring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But they get shooed off anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, wait a minute, that's really important evidence, right? And anyway, so Chicago was Able Danger. That is to say, the Chicago was some shit that the killers set up, and then Miami was some stuff that the killers set up, and then when Hoover came into Kennedy and said they're going to try to kill you in Dallas, Kennedy called in the Secret Service, and the Secret Service said, look, we busted those guys in Chicago, right? Right. We busted those guys in Miami, right? Right. We're telling you the stuff that Hoover is hearing out of Dallas, those are our guys. And they're out there making noise to see whether our security works. And look, our security works. The FBI found it. Kudos to the FBI. Send Hoover a cigar or, a young male hooker, whatever. Pat him on the head. And, listen, I apologize. That I think that nobody has any business slamming Hoover, and certainly not slamming him for being gay. I mean, what kind of stupid homophobic bullshit is that I should sit here and make fun of Hoover for being gay? There's no information. I've never seen any information that suggested that Hoover had hookers. He had a very, very serious lover in Tolson. But, it's so how in this day and age, that's not supposed to be a snicker and a snide remark. And I apologize to everybody in the
I guess you might, because he was supposedly a stickler for rectitude, and you might say it created a situation where he might have been compromised with the mob.
Well, anyhow, so I think I have an answer.
Yeah, but that's great insight, though. That Chicago thing is that explains why he would have gone to Dallas despite the warning. Yeah,
you have to have an answer. If you don't have an answer to why JFK ignored the FBI warning, you should shut up talking about the Kennedy assassination until you do. Mm-hmm. Now, I got to get in my car and start driving, but I don't think we have to hang up. And I don't want to hang up because I really haven't gotten to the punchline. Anyway, so my point is that I'm every time I turn around, I'm building up another piece of information that suggests that Hoover was not involved in the Kennedy assassination. And the notion that he would warn Kennedy that he was going to be assassinated, how does that not get him a pass?
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Anyway, and the thing is then that if Hoover wasn't involved, Johnson wasn't involved. And Hoover and Johnson were bestest buds, and but I don't know that we have time to totally beat that up, but I think that every piece of information that you have ever seen that suggested that Lyndon Johnson was involved in the Kennedy assassination is the product of the killers. And very often it's the product, it's of someone who was duped by the killers into buying this crap. But the notion, when you start racking up the evidence, that Hoover was not involved in the assassination, it's really, really overwhelming. But so let me do a little bit of that. There, 2 FBI agents go to the autopsy and say that it was obvious, it was apparent, this is exact quote, it was apparent that there had been surgery to the head area before the autopsy started. And that's an FBI memo that survived, right? If Hoover had been involved in the assassination, that memo would not have been written. Let me explain that means that Kennedy's body was stolen and was operated on before the autopsy started, which means that the casket that Jackie was accompanying, are you there? No, you're not. Oh.
Yes?
Can you call me back in 90 seconds?
I'm here.
I got to go. I got to talk to hang on.
Okay.
You can edit this thing, right?
Yeah.
Never done that on this one.
3. Okay, we're back.
Okay. Where were we? I'm not kidding.
You're making the case how people are being misled to think that Lyndon Johnson was involved in the actual assassination.
And Hoover as well, right? I mean, I don't think that there is anyone who suggests that Johnson was involved and not Hoover. And I don't think that that's bad logic, but I think that you can run it in the opposite direction. And the fact that these two FBI agents said that Kennedy's body had been operated on means that there's some investigation on it. As David Liston. There's no way. Obviously, was not on a plane, not in that cabin, had been stolen. It had been stolen off of the plane before the plane took off, and there's all sorts of peripheral evidence to suggest that, that's clearly what happened, including the fact that Jackie was going nuts, saying, "Why the hell are we still on the ground? Let's get out of here." And the reason they were on the ground is because the Secret Service was panicked about how they were going to manage to steal the body off of the plane, and they got a great idea to have Johnson get sworn in, and then moved everybody into the room where Johnson was sworn in, so moved everybody out of the room where the casket was so they could pull the body out of the casket and then take it off. But all of that is rooted in this FBI memo that says that beyond question, there's photographic evidence of it as well, of this photographs that were taken before the autopsy started that show clear surgery. Somebody really sloppy, crude surgery to Kennedy's. He had a bullet entry wound on his temple, his right temple, and this was not a plastic surgeon or somebody who knew what they were doing, who ripped it open to try to make it look like an exit wound. It did not look like an exit wound, but that's kind of beside the point. The point that I'm trying to make is that Hoover he sent the agents there. He didn't tell them to lie. When they wrote an accurate report, he didn't destroy that accurate report. He carried that accurate report so that it ends up in our hands. Now, this is it's on the White House tapes, the story I'm about to tell you, but it's also, I got it from the book JFK and the Unspeakable, and it's one of the reasons that I think that that's such an important book, not for its analysis, but just for its assembling of the information. And like I said, it completely leaves Bush out, and I suspect that the guy was told, look, you want to publish your book, don't say anything about Bush. And if you don't say anything about Bush, we will publish it. And they did, and, it's got fairly wide distribution, and Oliver Stone went around promoting it. That's a nice thing to happen. I wish you'd do that for me. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, good. The morning after the assassination, Lyndon Johnson is now president. The minute he walks in, his phone rings. This is like 9 o'clock, it might be 8 o'clock in the morning. His phone rings, and it's John McCone, the head of the CIA. And he tells Johnson, we have a audio tape. We bugged the phones at the Cuban and Russian embassies, and we have audio tape of Oswald in the Cuban embassy talking to a Russian assassination master. And this ties the Russians to the assassination, and Johnson says, oh my God, this is World War III, right? What are we going to do with this? How do we not respond by, starting World War III. And, Johnson is really, really flummoxed, and McCone doesn't encourage him to not feel that way, right? McCone sympathizes and says, yeah, this is a real friggin' disaster, all right. Anyway, he hangs up the phone, and almost instantly it rings again, and it's Hoover. And Hoover says, I have the tape of Oswald in Mexico, and my boys interviewed Oswald for 7 hours, and then they flew into Washington, and they've been listening to this tape for the last 7 hours, and they say that without any question, this is not Oswald. That Oswald spoke perfect Russian, this guy speaks terrible Russian, and it doesn't sound like Oswald. And Johnson says, well, Johnson and Hoover both appreciate the fact that this shows that the CIA was involved in the assassination, right? How could they have this tape in their possession? Right?
Yeah, it's very convenient.
If they were not involved in the assassination. This tape had to have been prepared months in advance. They clearly were involved in the assassination, and they're trying to start World War III. And the fact that Johnson preserved these, right, he taped these conversations, and he didn't destroy them. He put them into our hands, and if we're too stupid to not recognize that, oh, wait a minute, if you don't have an analysis of the Kennedy assassination that takes this phone conversation and puts it into the heart of your analysis, you should shut up because you don't know what you're talking about. There's obviously something going on here with which you are familiar. But if you could, I also think that if you can, read the transcripts or listen to those conversations between those individuals and conclude that Hoover and Johnson were involved in the Kennedy assassination, I think you're out of your mind. I think there's something very, very seriously wrong with your analytical skills and abilities if that doesn't, totally make you see that Hoover and Johnson were at polar extremes from the people who killed Kennedy. That the people who killed Kennedy clearly did it in order to justify an invasion of Cuba. In fact, Fabian Escalante, the head of Cuban security, says that the mafia paid the CIA $50 million to essentially conduct to pay the expenses of the assassination, right? You got a whole lot of people who have to get paid enough money that they will understand without a shadow of a doubt that if they ever open their mind, they're dead. They'll open their mouths and talk about, their participation, that they're dead, in addition to which they will be sufficiently grateful for the enormous sums that you have paid them for doing, very minor stuff. I'm not talking about the shooters. In fact, I think that, I'll say it because I can say it quickly. George H.W. Bush was in the Dow Tech building, says Roger Craig, and Deputy Vaughn, and essentially Jim Garrison, although they didn't know the name George Bush at the time, but they said an independent oil operator from Houston, who they would both, all of them have insisted was also CIA connected. I think that David Morales, there are witnesses who saw somebody matching David Morales' description in the sixth floor. There were apparently other people in the sixth floor as well, although, who knows what happened. When the shooting was happening, I would guess that Morales was there alone. And E. Howard Hunt was on the grassy knoll, says his son, right? His son saw completely, he says that he's walking down the street in New York City and sees this picture of one of the tramps, and he says, oh my God, that's my dad. My dad was the shooter from the grassy knoll. Look, there he is in this picture, having been arrested in the railroad yard. Anyway, sorry. But the point that I'm trying to get to is this analysis of what's going on with Johnson and Hoover and what's their role in the Kennedy assassination. And I think that it's very, very clear from those things that I just explained that, like I said, Hoover and Johnson are polar opposites, one, and that Johnson sees that Oswald has been set up to appear to be an agent of the Russians, the UPI, and everybody else are running around screaming that Oswald was a communist and promoting the story about Oswald and his connections with the Russians and the Cubans. And they see themselves as that the killers are trying to drag them into World War, certainly into an invasion of Cuba, which will cost several 100,000 lives, most of them Cuban, but many of them American. And, geez, how long is the street fighting in Havana going to last? Right? These are very, very, very committed revolutionaries who are very well trained, and a lot of them are very experienced. Anyway, so that all my life, I have been, well, since I saw the Zapruder film for the first time, I have been trained to think that the Warren Commission was noxious, that they were criminal, that they were, right, some of the worst people in the history of the world. And I now see them, and Johnson's establishing them as an effort to thwart the killers, to frustrate the killers' attempts to have this war lead to an invasion of Cuba and conflict with the Russians by taking the road that Oswald acted alone. And the thought experiment that I would like people to try to conduct for themselves is to picture that they're Robert Kennedy, and that you're sitting there in the room with Johnson and Hoover. Well, you're Robert Kennedy. You know that you were not involved in the assassination, and you're sitting there with these two guys who, from, I want to say, a casual observation of the obvious facts. Well, they're not obvious to most of us, but to Robert Kennedy, he could very well have been in the room when these conversations were taking place. And they're sitting there, and on the one hand, you have the Rockefellers and the Harrimans and the Cabot Lodges and the Morgans and whoever the other members are of this dark ruling elite, deep state. They're trying to push you and the rest of the world into an invasion of Cuba at the very least. And on the other hand, you have your responsibility to capture and prosecute and punish the perpetrators of the Kennedy assassination, but all you have is one of Hoover's top assets sitting in jail in Dallas, and all of the shooters have been escorted into the police station and out the back door. That is to say, Hunt was arrested in the railroad yard. He was escorted into the police station. On the way there, Ed Lansdale gives him a high sign. Right there, you recognize that, I assume, but anybody in your audience who doesn't, all you have to do is Google Ed Lansdale and Fletcher Prouty, and it will come up. Lansdale has been very, very effectively identified by two very, very high-ranking and effective witnesses who worked with him on a daily basis as being in Dallas in the street, waving to E. Howard Hunt as he was being led by the police to the police station. Well, Hunt gets led in the front door and out the back door. Deputy Vaughn says that he escorted George Bush as a shooter to the police station. He gets escorted in the front door and out the back door. And Hoover is sitting there as the chief investigative officer of the country with Robert Kennedy, who's the attorney general, and they have nobody in hand. They have nobody in hand. They know, they call Bush in for questioning. They know he was there, but they can't prove it. And given how much, given the fact that they apparently knew about the station wagon full of CIA killers, anti-Castro Cubans that drove from Florida, in any case, into Dallas in the days before the assassination, loaded, right, armed to the hilt, and then got passed out. Hunt walked in and passed out money and meth. Given how much Hoover knew about all of that, right, he called all of these guys in immediately, and Lawrence tried to tell them, no, they already knew that stuff. I can't imagine that they didn't have Hunt's phone staff, and that they called Bush in. They obviously had Bush, But they couldn't prove anything. You know, those guys were smart enough to not say anything on the phone that could be used. And so what do you do? If you're in that situation, what do you do? And then when Oswald gets murdered, you now have dead Oswald. What do you do? Well, I guess I'm open to the suggestion that Oswald may have still been alive, and they said, well, we will pretend to kill Oswald, and then we'll lay it all on him. That's conceivable to me. That's the first time I've ever had that thought cross my mind.
Wow, yeah. That
involved in staging the murder of Oswald. But in any case, I no longer see the Warren Commission as being evil, and I don't see the people who put it together as being evil. I see them as being, well, I'm willing to say heroes. If you're thwarting the plans of you're the President of the United States and you're taking steps to thwart the plans of the guys who killed your predecessor, well, you know, that's a dangerous ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're standing with a friend on the street and somebody walks up to your friend and says, hey, give me your wallet, and your friend doesn't, and they shoot him, and the guy then turns to you and says, give me your wallet, you know, I'd be inclined to give him my wallet. But if they're saying send the Marines into Cuba and kill all of these people, Johnson, to me, that's heroic for him to say, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to blame this thing on Oswald. We're going to shoot that stuff down. And Johnson's biographer, this guy Caro, C-A-R-O, says that Johnson says that Robert Kennedy said that he wanted McCloy and Dulles on the Warren Commission. And lots and lots of people who I think don't know anything point to that and say, oh, you see how dark and dirty the Warren Commission was. No, I think that Robert Kennedy was saying, you guys killed my brother. You killed my brother with the intention of blaming it on the Cubans and the Russians, using it to justify an invasion of Cuba, and we're going to make you sign off on this story that Oswald acted alone. We're not only going to thwart you, we're going to rub it in your eye and make you sign off on it. Well, I'm open to the suggestion that but I should perhaps let you ask a question. But my question is, how did Hoover get his hands on the tape? If the CIA went to the trouble of creating the tape, why did they hand it to Hoover? If the CIA wanted to say that Oswald was at the Mexican embassy, why did they release a photograph of somebody who could not possibly have been more obviously not Oswald? Right? The guy weighs like 100 pounds more than Oswald. He's 3 or 4 inches taller than Oswald. He's got a big, fat, square jaw, while Oswald has a pointed. Anyway, why did they release that photograph? Why did they hand Hoover the tapes? And I'm open to the suggestion that Johnson and Hoover and Kennedy were set up to think that these guys were planning an invasion of Cuba. Certainly the Mafia thought that the Mafia had topped up $50 million to pay off all of the participants in the anticipation that there was going to be an invasion of Cuba. But looking at the fact that somebody handed Hoover that tape, and looking at the fact that they released that picture of this guy who clearly wasn't Oswald, I'm open to the suggestion that they double-crossed the Mafia, that the killers didn't want to start World War III. They liked living on this planet. They you know, it was not going to be good for business. And they were going to get the Vietnam War, so what the hell, they don't need Cuba, they had Vietnam. But that they had to go through the motions and into the process. Okay, we haven't gotten to the punchline yet. Sorry. In the process, they forced Johnson and Hoover and Robert Kennedy to incriminate themselves and put themselves in the position of certainly being guilty of covering up the assassination if they were not also guilty of murdering John Kennedy. And there's lots and lots of people who are very willing to leap from, yes, they formed the Warren Commission, and yes, they suppressed the evidence in the assassination, and therefore they killed Kennedy. That's a very comfortable leap for people. But we may be running out of time, so I don't hear you interrupting me. I'm going to run on.
Okay.
no, because you're providing an interpretation of these events, which is unique. I haven't really heard, but it is I would say a plausible explanation for the series.
Well, I think that it's way more than plausible.
Yeah.
Nobody else is even addressing these questions.
Yeah, because there's a logic fail here that why would Hoover do that? If he was involved in these,
right?
Yeah, with the memo.
In fact, I will accept plausible if you will accept that absolutely every other explanation is completely and wholly and utterly implausible. That this is, and I should say that the notion that John Kennedy Jr. was killed by a program flight instructor, man, that's friggin' off the wall. That is nuts. Who would buy something like that? Except that it's the only explanation I know of, or the evidence that the unquestionable evidence, right? The very solid evidence of the lie about there being a flight instructor on the plane, the fuel control valve being in the off position, the lie that Kennedy didn't contact the tower, the disappearance of Todd for gun, the 15-and-a-half-hour delay. It's an insane explanation that it is the only one. There's this guy, Larry Rivera, and I would encourage you to Google his name and Zapruder film and see what you find. But he discovered audio tapes. Somebody made audio tapes of interviews with the 4 motorcycle policemen that were accompanying the limousine, and every single one of them said that the limousine came to a 20-second stop in front of the grassy knoll.
Yeah, which is a complete violation of procedure because you're supposed to speed up.
Duh.
Yeah.
And they waited for the fatal shot.
Which is why Dan Rather says it didn't stop, which is he offered that up, which is strange because why would you? It stopped. Yeah.
Yeah. Why would you say that?
Yeah.
And the thing is, how is that not in the Zapruder film? How did they make a copy of the Zapruder film that didn't include that? Before the assassination and when they got handed, Abraham Zapruder was working for them, and he immediately handed the film to the Secret Service, who obviously, now that you know that they stopped the limousine in front of the grassy knoll waiting for the headshot, the Secret Service was completely involved in the assassination. They also stole the body. It wasn't the CIA nearly so much as the Secret Service that was involved. Now, there were 3 very, 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 very high-ranking men in the CIA, Bush, Hunt, and Morales, I believe, who had guns in their hands. But I don't think anybody in the CIA, other than those 3, were involved. I don't think there's any credible evidence that anybody other than those 3 were involved. They may have been, but I'm not aware of any evidence that I regard as being credible that shows that. The question is, and this is the $64,000 question, and if you come away, people listening to this come away with anything, I want them to come away with this, and I apologize for saving it to last, but I mentioned it at the start. How the hell did they give us a Zapruder film that had a shot from the front, which in an afternoon, you give me a little bit of assistance and, state-of-the-art equipment. In an afternoon, I can turn a shot from the front into a shot from the rear. That's easy. That's a walk in the park. It's going to take me 6 months to figure out how to eliminate the limousine stop. I'm going to have to try doing it unsuccessfully 8 or 9 times before I finally figure out how to do it right. And these guys did it so well that nobody noticed for 50 years. God damn. And nobody noticed, period. That if you didn't have the motorcycle cops telling you this, and, there are people who have done very, 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 very detailed studies. Jim Fetzer, and let me pat him on the back 700 or 800 times for his work saying, look at this light post. It's tilted. It's wrong. This witness said she was standing with her toes on the curb, and look at her. She's 3 feet back on the grass. Look at this photograph. It shows her standing on the curb, and the Zapruder film, she's 3 feet standing back on the grass. So clearly something's going on, and Fetzer was raising all of this stuff, and, I'm listening to it saying, yes, it's got the shot from the front. What the hell do I care if a witness is misplaced? And why would they alter the film to lean a lamppost the wrong way and move the witness back on the grass? And now, finally, thanks to Larry Rivera and a number of other heroic individuals, we know that